Welcome to the Boardroom. I'm your host, Ngcakaza, and I'm joined by Fatsani, the Senior Manager of Public Policy and Taxes at the SAB, as we are talking taxes here in Sentinel JSE. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, please introduce us more to the subject matter today. We are talking taxes. What about taxes?
So we spoke specifically about beer excise taxes or excise taxes in general at our beer tax Indaba, which really was deep diving into some of the dynamics around the macroeconomic environment in South Africa, how producers and consumers are interacting with that macroeconomic environment, the trends thereof, and really trying to understand how does that interact with excise taxes. In particular, the amount of certainty and predictability we can have in that environment. Historically, we've had a lot of volatility on the excise taxes, and we took it upon ourselves and with speakers from Oxford Economics Africa, as well as the CEO of the South African Institute of Taxation, to really have a deep, substantial conversation around what are the developments in tax policy, the macroeconomic environment, and how does that interact.
What is government's policy in this line of taxation? Are business overstrained by taxes in South Africa, would you say?
I think in terms of being overstrained, it's mainly coming from factors that no one can control. So we know over the last 2 years, we've had a very high inflation environment, which has affected every company across the world. So it's something that you cannot affect by yourself as a business. You just need to absorb. But we know that tax policy comes from the government, which they have an opportunity to formulate and enact the way they please. So currently, the excise policy in South Africa says that the excise tax rate should be increased by projected inflation. What we know that hasn't been the trend. So it's been additional stress on a business like SAB, where you've had a very tough economic environment, stuff you can't control, like increasing costs, and then added to that you have tax policies that move in a very unstable direction. So we've been affected in terms of business planning. You can't plan, how much barley or malt you get from farmers, because you just don't know how important factors like tax are going to come up to when the government tables the budget. So I think that's where we have a lot of strain, is the unpredictability of the environment in which we operate.
Is business foreseeing a better working relationship with this government of national unity going forward? Even in policy and matters like taxation, is business excited with these new developments in the political space?
Yeah, change can sometimes be good, right? And politics, having a strong democracy like our own, getting new people to really start applying their mind to things that need to be improved or changed is great. In terms of the excise policy, we have always had a very strong tax framework. The current policy has been in place for 10 years, so it's definitely time to get politicians and policymakers alike to sit at a table or whatever needs to be done and really talk about what's changed, how can we improve it, and what are the recent developments that have happened across the world. We heard from the Oxford Economics lead economist today that there's international benchmarks around where the wind is blowing in terms of excise taxes. We don't know how much of the current government, this new coalition, will start rethinking and invigorating conversations around that. But there's definitely opportunity for change, which keeps us optimistic, that we can really get more people with different views into the rooms around excise tax policy.
How competent are we? Looking at the whole global spectrum, because some complain about taxes in South Africa. With other investment destinations, how competent are we?
So I think there's a lot of taxes that, people have a different viewpoint on. We have 4 main tax instruments. Excise taxes only 4% of GDP, so not a big instrument, but it does affect a big, sector like ours, where there's a lot of taxes that we put into that in terms of revenue. So on that conversation, I would say we're very nuanced in our ask. Our ask is to improve the system. There's some gaps and leakages in terms of revenue raising opportunities for the state that haven't been looked at. We think that should be on the table, considerably so, even in spite of the competencies thereof. But I think we are very cognizant of the excise tax framework and the gaps in terms of it not being based on alcohol content, and then secondly around tax certainty, which we think needs to be taken more seriously in terms of improving that instrument in general and how businesses interact with it.
Also, what would you say maybe the general public and also looking at SMEs getting into business, what are some of those reforms that they can bring into their own business making to make them more tax compliant?
Yeah, so tax compliance is very broad, right? Administration is a big part of what the Revenue Service empowers all taxpayers with. I think understanding how the legislation is enacted and how it relates to the business and how they want to, really move forward. The bigger they get, the more tax compliance becomes a necessity. So I think in terms of understanding the regulation and the administration is to committing to understanding where the South African Revenue Service is getting workshops or giving workshops on how taxes are administered and why. I think empowering yourself with that education is critical as an SMME, but I also think it's important to really have an understanding of how you want to grow. The bigger you grow, the more you think about how to formalize your tax systems. And I think the Revenue Service provides multiple opportunities to get SMMEs in line with what exists and as close as possible to immersing themselves in the tax environment through workshops. So being in tune with those workshops, getting the dates, I think will be critical for SMMEs going forward.
Yes, Fatsani, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.